The knock came so hard that my whole door shook on its hinges, and for a second, I thought the storm had torn a tree loose and thrown it against my house. I grabbed the lantern from the table, and my hand was already shaking before I even reached the handle. Out here, at the edge of the settlement, nobody visits at night. Nobody visits at all. The rain was falling so hard it sounded like static, like the sky itself had lost its signal, and lightning kept splitting the clouds apart every few seconds. I opened the door an inch, just enough to see who or what was standing on my porch. It was not who. 3 enormous shapes filled the space where my porch used to feel wide. Scales, dark and wet, catching the lantern light like broken glass. Wings, torn in more than one place, hanging limp against heaving sides. Eyes, gold and slit-pupilled, staring down at me with an expression I did not expect from a creature that could have torn my door off its frame without trying. Fear. The tallest one, the one in front, dropped to one knee so that its head came almost level with mine. Its voice came out low and broken, words shaped strangely by a mouth never built for human language. "Please," it said, "my family, we cannot fly anymore." Behind it, half hidden by its bulk, I saw a smaller shape curled around 2 even smaller ones. A mother, wings bent wrong, blood running pink in the rainwater beneath her, and 2 hatchlings, barely taller than my knee, shivering so hard their scales clicked together like teeth. I had heard about dragons before. Everyone had. The news feeds called them the Ashwing, refugees from a war none of us understood, fleeing across the stars after their home was burned out from under them. Every colony that had taken them in had regretted it, according to the feeds. Every world had eventually closed its doors. Too strong, they said, too dangerous, too much to risk. I had a daughter asleep upstairs. I had a shotgun in the closet by the door. I had every reason in the world to do the smart thing and shut this door and bolt it twice. I stepped back and pulled it wide open instead. "Get in," I said, "before you catch your death out there." The big one, the father, looked at me like I had spoken a language he didn't understand either. Then he turned and said something low and fast to the mother, in a tongue full of clicks and rumbles, and she dragged herself up onto 3 good legs and limped toward my door, pulling her hatchlings against her side with what was left of one wing. They barely fit. My living room, which had always felt too big and too empty since my wife passed, suddenly felt like a matchbox with 3 dragons folding themselves into it, careful not to knock over the shelves, careful not to breathe too hard near the lamp. I lit the fireplace. I grabbed every blanket in the house, every towel, and started pressing them against the mother's wounds before I even asked a single question. She flinched at first, muscles bunching under her scales, ready to strike. Then she looked down at my hands, small and human, and shaking slightly from the cold, and something in her eyes changed. She let me work. "What happened to you?" I asked, not really expecting an answer. The father answered instead, kneeling awkwardly by the fire, wings drawn in tight so they wouldn't catch on anything. "Hunters," he said, "not animals. People. They shot us down over the ridge." We flew as far as we could before her wing gave out. "People from here?" I asked, feeling something cold settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with the storm. "I do not know this place," he said. "We were only looking for somewhere the rain would stop long enough to rest." I thought about the settlement 3 miles down the road. Good people, mostly. But good people get scared, and scared people do things they wouldn't normally do. If word got out that a family of dragons had crash-landed near town, I didn't like to imagine what some folks might grab from their gun cabinets. "You're safe here," I said, and I meant it, even though I had no idea yet how I would keep that promise. The 2 hatchlings had gone quiet, watching me from behind their mother's wing with wide, unblinking eyes. I remembered I had half a pot of stew left over from dinner, still warm on the stove. I didn't know what dragons ate. I didn't know if stew would help or hurt or do nothing at all, but I brought it anyway, along with the bread from the counter, and set it down in front of them. The mother looked at the bowl, then at me, then said something to the father in that same clicking language. He translated, voice rough, with something that sounded almost like disbelief. She asks what you want for this. Want? I said, I don't want anything. You're hurt. You're hungry. That's all that matters right now. The father stared at me for a long moment, rain still dripping steadily from the ridges along his neck onto my floor, forming small dark pools I would deal with later. Where we come from, he said slowly, nothing is given without a price. Strength is given for loyalty. Shelter is given for service. Even a bowl of food comes with a debt attached. Not here, I said. Not in this house. He didn't answer that. He just watched me hand the bread to his hatchlings, watched me kneel down to their height so I wouldn't frighten them further, watched me smile even though my hands hadn't stopped shaking since I opened that door. Upstairs, a small voice called down through the noise of the storm. Dad, what's that sound? My daughter Ellie, 7 years old, appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. I saw the exact moment she spotted the dragons. Her whole body went rigid, breath catching in her throat. I moved toward the stairs fast, but before I could say anything, the smallest hatchling let out a soft, curious chirp and took a wobbling step toward the staircase, craning its neck to get a better look at her. Ellie's fear cracked, just slightly, into something closer to wonder. Is that a baby dragon? She whispered. It is, I said carefully. They're very cold and very tired, and they need our help tonight. Can you help me find more blankets? She didn't answer right away. She looked at the mother dragon, curled protectively around her children despite her injuries, and something in that image must have made sense to my daughter in a way words couldn't explain. A parent protecting their child. She understood that better than most 7-year-olds ever should have had to. She came down the stairs. By the time the fire had burned low and the worst of the storm had passed, the mother's wounds were wrapped as well as I could manage with what I had, and both hatchlings had fallen asleep in a tangled pile near the hearth, worn out from fear and cold. Ellie sat close to them, close enough to feel their warmth but far enough to stay careful, watching them breathe. The father sat across from me, wings finally relaxed, no longer braced for a fight that hadn't come. You are not what the stories say about your kind, he said quietly. What do the stories say? That humans are quick to strike first, that you fear anything stronger than yourselves. I thought about that for a moment, watching the firelight flicker across his scales, listening to the rain finally soften outside. Some of us are like that, I admitted. Fear makes people do strange things, but fear isn't the only thing that makes us who we are. Headlights swept briefly across my window, cutting through the last of the rain, and my stomach tightened. A truck engine idled somewhere down the lane, close enough that I could hear voices carried faintly on the wind. Someone had seen something. Word traveled fast, even in a storm. The father tensed immediately, rising halfway to his feet, positioning himself between the door and his sleeping family, without a single word needed. Stay down, I told him. Let me handle this. I stepped outside onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind me. 2 trucks sat at the end of my driveway, engines running, headlights cutting through the drizzle. A group of men stood near them, rifles slung over shoulders, faces set hard with the particular kind of nervous courage that comes from numbers. Evening, I said, keeping my voice steady. Heard something big went down near the ridge, one of them called out. Something dangerous. You seen anything? I looked back at my house, at the warm light spilling from the windows, at the shape of a small dragon head, briefly silhouetted against the curtains before disappearing again. Nothing dangerous out here, I said. Just me and my daughter, riding out the storm. Mind if we take a look around? Actually, I said, I do mind. This is my land, my house, and there's nothing here that concerns you. The man who had spoken studied me for a long moment, rain dripping off the brim of his cap. Whatever he saw in my face, Whatever certainty he found there seemed to be enough. He nodded slowly, motioned to the others, and the trucks pulled away, taillights fading into the dark. I stood on the porch a while longer, letting the last of the rain wash over me, before I finally went back inside. The father was waiting by the door, having clearly heard every word. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he reached up, carefully, and pressed one clawed hand against his own chest, over his heart, before extending it toward me, palm open. "Among my people," he said, "this is not given lightly. It means my family's life is bound to yours, until the debt is repaid in kind." "You don't owe me anything," I said. "I know," he said. "That is exactly why I am offering it." I looked past him at Ellie, asleep now against the side of the mother dragon, one small hand resting against a warm, scaled side that rose and fell with slow, steady breathing. I looked at the two hatchlings curled together by the dying fire, safe and warm for the first time in who knew how long. I reached out and placed my hand against his. Outside, the storm finally broke, and the first hint of morning light began to creep over the ridge, pale and quiet, like the world itself was exhaling after holding its breath all night. Whatever came next, whatever the galaxy still had waiting for either of our families, I understood one simple truth as the sun rose over my quiet, ordinary house. Kindness had knocked on my door in the middle of a storm, wearing the shape of something the whole galaxy feared, and I had chosen to let it in.